Whether or not we realize it, race is a critical part of our everyday interactions. We form communities on campus with those we identify with. We think sometimes in blanket stereotypes about the people we see walking into class, and we listen to news stories of people of color as they become victims of police shootings. Yet, despite the constant role that race plays in our lives as students, it is still invisible to the majority of us. White individuals, like myself, live in a state of unconsciousness regarding our race. I'm never forced to contemplate my race in my daily life while undergoing seemingly normal tasks, like applying for a job, or being pulled over by a police officer, or even selecting a neighborhood for residence. My experience of race cannot be addressed without first analyzing the inherent privileges granted to me by the social nature of the color of my skin. However, white privilege alone cannot account for every layer of my identity. The benefit of intersectionality is that it captures experiential complexity. My experience with race is intrinsically intertwined with many networks in my identity, including being a woman. Thus, my reflection of white privilege must be coupled with an intersectional evaluation to fully explain my experience of race. For most of my life, being white has been like being a fish in the sea. My whiteness has allowed me to easily navigate through the waters of life, and the color of my skin has directed me towards social success as if riding a steady current. The reality is that we swim in a sea of white privilege every day. Just like a fish is unaware of the water in which they swim, I too have been unaware of the white privilege that saturates my daily life. One of the earliest interactions with white privilege occurred on a summer day while sitting in the car with my grandmother. As we waited outside the restaurant, several people walked past our car on their way into the restaurant. White men, women, and children passed seamlessly. A few moments later, a black man neared our car on his path into the restaurant, and my grandmother's hand reached for the button to ensure that the car was locked. Reflecting on that moment now, it is obvious to me that white people are privileged to live without these stereotypes of violence. My grandmother hastily made a judgment that the black man could harm us based on the stereotype that black means criminal. Meanwhile, the white men passed easily because white privilege frees us from becoming victims of racist stereotypes. Experiences like these became the bricks in building the foundation of my whiteness. Sometimes I learned through fear, just as my grandmother's message translated to, be afraid of anyone who is different from you. Learning to be white is like following a cultural script that is written by the role models in your life from an early age, much like my grandmother was to me. I learned from authority figures in my school, like my third grade teacher, Miss Nail, and the heroes on TV like Hermione Granger, who are almost always white. Part of the construction of race is the way that, when used by whites, the word race comes to mean otherness. Therefore, my scripts growing up didn't factor in critical thinking about white privilege, because thinking about race isn't part of the white script. However, a script is merely an outline, and we have the power to revise, edit, and rewrite our own scripts. Thinking critically about race in this scholarly setting has equipped me with better tools to add new content to my script and think actively about my white privilege. However, looking at life through only the lens of white privilege reduces the phenomena of oppression and advantage to merely one category. By this perspective, you could simply glance at the color of my skin and conclude that I live in a completely unoppressed life. Of course, this is simply not true. As a white woman, my race is a privilege, yet my gender is also seen as a disadvantage in many settings. It is impossible to understand race without differentiating the experiences of women. During my first year of college, I designed a project for class to research women breaking the glass ceiling in corporate America. I discovered the difference between my own experience as an aspiring professional and the experience of a peer female of color. Although the wage gap exists for women like me, it is even wider for women of color. This is just one example, but it shows the importance of taking an intersectional approach in my personal life and understanding that race must be considered alongside other social identities. Reflecting on this topic has not only made me more conscious of my own experience within our racialized world, but has compelled me to consider the compounding effects of social identities like gender at play with race. Although I will continue to live in this sea of white privilege, at least I'm aware that I am swimming through it, And this knowledge, I believe, is the first step towards a future in which no skin tone is considered privileged over another.